Sarah from Roots here, and in this video we're going to talk about ramps, wild leeks, and sustainable harvesting practices, aka don't be rude. This is a plant that's been adored for generations through large swaths of the country, and in the past couple of decades it's exploded in popularity, and therefore we really want to take care to tend to these populations and see them flourish, and not necessarily the extractive practices that are setting them back. It's mid to late May, the black flies are out, and we're just at the end of the harvesting season for them. This is a spring ephemeral. It's really exciting to come upon in the spring as something to eat, and it's something that people are really comfortable with eating. It's so familiar being in the allium family with that garlicky, oniony smell. I've really taken care not to step on many, and yet I can smell that throughout this whole area. So Leeks Identification, Allium trichocum. We are looking at the leaves before the flowers emerge. We are looking at long elliptical leaves, 8 to 10 inches. They have a bit of a cool waxy touch to them, and if you were to crush them, they have that classic garlicky onion smell. Sometimes there's a reddish coloration at the base, sometimes there isn't. We're looking at the lily family. And after these leaves die back in the summer, flower will emerge, and we actually are just seeing the beginnings of these flowers emerging now, really kind of signifying the end of the harvest season. And the flowers will be white petaled and an umbel at the end of a naked stalk. After which, some of which will produce seed, and you see these beautiful shiny black seeds encased in a papery husk where that flower was. So the smell is really helpful and pretty significant. People are known to mistake other plants for this, and Vermont has had a rash of false hellebore poisonings, which sound awful, sound terrible. So, you really got to know what you're looking at if you're going to put it in your mouth or you're going to have somebody else eat it. You really have to be sure. I would be horrified to have eaten false hellebore unknowingly. So really get out your identification books, make sure that you are collecting the right species of plant that you're intending to collect, and those are the identification features that I'm looking for. So when it comes to harvesting ramps, there's the whole plant, and what we're looking at are the aerial parts, the leaves above the ground before they set flower and go to seed, and then below which, underneath, is the bulbous root structure. And for a long time, people have been harvesting both the bulb and the leaf. And what we really want to communicate is that through harvesting the leaves, you can still enjoy this as a spring forage, but you're also not removing one of the main ways in which this plant is able to reproduce. So when removing a bulb or the main root of a plant, you're killing that whole plant. And this is one of the main ways in which this plant really reproduces itself. So understanding how plants reproduce is really important when it comes to foraging, because it clues you in how to, what best practices might be. And maybe you don't harvest it. Maybe patches are really just small. Here we're in an area that has acres, and so I feel okay about maybe plucking a few leaves here and there and enjoying them and feeling good about it. So when we're taking a look at the plant and how the plant reproduces, it has two main ways. One is through the clonal reproduction of the bulb, and the other is through production of seed and allowing those seeds to germinate. It takes 5 to 7 years for a plant to mature enough to be able to produce seed, viable seed. And of those seeds, it's said to be in the single digits, say 5%, that are viable and will germinate. So that's really, really low. If you tend to it, maybe if you're popping those seeds in the ground, or you're harvesting and collecting them and propagating them, which is really cool, then you're really going to increase those levels. But when it comes to just a wild population, seed germination is not the main way it really reproduces. And what that way is through the clonal reproduction of bulbs, in which one bulb produces another little offshoot bulb, and why we often see these grow in clumps. So it's our practice just to harvest the leaves and leave the bulbs in the ground to continue to do their thing. So when we come upon the ramps and we notice that there are individual plants, we'll say, oh great, this has 2 leaves, this is 3 leaves, and I will just take one of those leaves. And that will be done scattered throughout the large population. When folks come in and, for whatever reason they come and extract bulbs and large swaths of the colony, because they're so slow to reproduce, this sets them back pretty significantly. And both with the ability for us to enjoy them as wild foraged plants, but also to see us enjoying them down into the future, we really want to not set them back and see them produce in abundance. And so just harvesting the leaves and just a few here and there really ensures that that is to be the case. Something that really strikes me is that where you find ramps in and of itself as an ecosystem tends to not be that common. So we find ourselves in rich soil and we see these other really beautiful plants that are indicators of that. So when I start to see plants like blue cohosh and Solomon seal and maidenhair fern, I'm starting to recognize that, oh, this is like a really cool piece of land in which there are these other plants that have, all of this value and worth unto themselves, not even necessarily to us as humans, that are really significant and exciting to find. And so these ecosystems themselves are not the most common. So it's one thing to come upon wild leek patches or those places. And so I think we want to take care not to trample the plants that are around them. Oftentimes in other locations in here, I'll see dwarf ginseng or ginseng itself, or I'll see black cohosh. And you just, want to pay attention to where your feet are landing and where you're disturbing the soil. And I think this all kind of gets housed in the, don't be rude, which is one of my only philosophies. I think it's also worth mentioning that there are things other than us as people who are eating these wild leeks, and we're seeing quite a bit of foraging throughout this patch here. So thinking beyond ourselves is a classy move. So with preservation, I often just like to eat them right away because it's just sort of like a spring excitement, and saute them in a little bit of ghee or butter and salt, and they're really delicious as is. We have also dried a fair amount to use for winter soups, or kind of like dried powdered leaves sprinkled in with sauteed mushrooms in the fall can be so nice, but they dry really nicely. There's a lot that one can do with them. In any way in which you would use other allium species, these are a great substitution. At the same time, I will say all these alliums are so good. So there's a lot of hoopla around wild leeks, but chives, onions, all of them are just so good for you. If wild leeks are prolific in your area, wonderful. Be considerate in your harvesting if you choose to harvest them. Really take a look at them as a population and see how you can add to their abundance, and then it'll be abundant for all. Enjoy them, recognize the precious resource that they are, and if you are so inclined, propagate and cultivate them and see new patches emerge and tend to those, and that would be a really wonderful way to go forward.